Welcome to Spook Splice, where every shadow whispers a story and every turn leads to the unknown. I'm just a regular artist with a small-town root seeking survival in the bustling Big Apple. Here in New York City, the great melting pot, every street corner has its own tale. People hustle, cabs honk, and lives intersect in a cacophony of sights and sounds. The buildings stand like ancient guardians, each holding a myriad of both grand and personal stories within their towering frames. This past year has been akin to riding the subway during rush hour, full of sudden stops and unexpected turns. Amid the swaying crowds of artists, workers, dreamers, and doers, I've painted and sketched, attempting to capture the essence of this sprawling urban landscape. Yet, personal connections have been as elusive as the changing shadows at sunset, compelling me to navigate the complexities of big city life largely on my own. I've often longed for the open spaces and familiar faces of my hometown down south, where life moves at a gentler pace. Yet here I am, in the heart of the concrete jungle, where the skyline stretches far and wide with its millions of windows, each a miniature canvas capturing snippets of the intricate human stories that swirls all around me. Today, something within me stirred, a quiet yet insistent call to venture to Times Square. In my first year here, I've deliberately steered clear of the tourist-laden paths. The thought of navigating through the sea of people, especially on New Year's Eve, seemed more daunting than any cityscape I'd ever tried to capture on canvas. The packed streets, like cans of sardines, never appealed to my craving for space and tranquility. But today is different. There's a pull, perhaps from my own restless spirit, urging me to join the throng, to immerse myself in the very heart of the city's chaos. It's as if I need this, a ritual of sorts, a symbolic crossing over the threshold of the past year's solitude and into a new year brimming with fresh hopes, goals, and the faint whisper of dreams yet to be chased. Maybe, just maybe, amidst the flickering lights and the collective anticipation of the crowd, I'll find a piece of what I've been searching for. A sense of belonging, a spark of inspiration, a new direction for the year to come. From my modest apartment in Sunset Park, Brooklyn, I hopped on the N train, which felt like a long metal snake making its way into the city's bustling heart. Inside the subway car, it was like a patchwork of people, each one with their own story, all of us heading to Times Square together. You could see it on everyone's faces, lit up by the dim subway lights, a mix of excitement and that kind of hopeful look you get when you're waiting for something big, like the New Year's ball dropping. With each stop drawing us deeper into the heart of Manhattan, closer to Times Square, the train swelled with more bodies, becoming increasingly crowded so that elbows jostled for space and breaths mingled in the stale air. Personal bubbles were a luxury none could afford. Amongst the sea of commuters, performers seeking fleeting fame had turned the cramped space into their stage. A trio, undeterred by the tight quarters, danced and sang, their voices competing with the clatter of the tracks. They passed a worn hat around, hopeful for a contribution, but the Big Apple's residents, seasoned in the art of indifference, merely shrugged off the performance. In this city, oddity is the norm. The extraordinary must work hard to turn heads. Feeling a mixture of irritation and admiration, I tried to carve out my own space, my thoughts drifting to the quiet streets of my hometown. The train screeched to a halt at the 42nd Street stop, and the doors opened to release a flood of humanity. We squeezed through the narrow staircase, a slow-moving mass of bodies, each person an obstacle to the freedom waiting above. I was jostled along by the relentless river of people, all of us eager to spill out into the city's streets. As minutes trickled by, and I found myself still trapped within the mass, frustration mounted. In a moment of exasperation, I lifted my gaze, scanning my surroundings for some escape. That's when I noticed it. An exit, almost like a dark eye peering out from under the flickering subway light. It stood unobstructed, curiously ignored by the throng. Its solitude amidst the chaos piqued my curiosity. Could that be an exit? I pondered, the thought mingling with confusion as to why it remained untouched by the crowd. Feeling more and more determined, I moved away from the crowd and headed towards that unnoticed passage. It seemed like it might be a quicker way out to the mind-freeing night that was waiting for me outside. To my delightful surprise, the pathway indeed led to an exit. I immediately felt the first brush of a cold winter breeze and glimpsed the dimming light of the outside world casting into the end of the staircase. But wait. As I fully emerged onto the street, I noticed an abrupt darkness suddenly hovered over the city sky, indifferent to the bustling twinkles of streetlights. Oh, it's dark already, I thought, slightly startled. But then, I remembered it was deep winter when darkness falls before 5 p.m., a time that often deepens my sense of solitude and introspection. Then I began to shift my focus to the actual streets of Midtown. I should be somewhere around 40th Street, between 6th and 7th Avenues, but the twisting, narrow streets of Midtown, buried under the monolithic Stonehenge of skyscrapers, always disorient me when I first emerge from the subway. I scanned my surroundings, searching for familiar landmarks to orient myself. That's when the eerie stillness struck me. Why were the streets so unexpectedly quiet? Sure, there was a healthy smattering of individuals around, but their presence hardly matched the crowd I was part of in the subway earlier. These scattered few moved silently, almost like shadows flitting against the cityscape, making the emptiness all the more noticeable. My attention was drawn to the attire and demeanor of the particular few individuals in front of me. They seemed to have just stepped out of a New Year's Eve costume party, each one donning outfits that appeared to be from different chapters of the city's past. The first to catch my eye was a woman, seemingly plucked right from the roaring 20s. She was draped in a flapper dress that shimmered with each subtle movement, fringes dancing at the hem. Dark kohl rimmed her eyes, lending a dramatic contrast to her pale skin, while a feathered headband crowned her neatly bobbed hair, giving her an air of both elegance and rebellion. She moved with a grace that belied her surroundings, as if she were waltzing through a speakeasy rather than a deserted city street. Not far from her was a man whose attire shouted the 1940s Harlem Renaissance. He wore a zoot suit with an extravagance that was impossible to ignore. Wide lapels flaring out from a long draping coat and pegged trousers gathered over shiny, pointed shoes. Yet for all his flamboyant dress, his face told a different story. His eyes were distant, his gaze fixed on a point far away, or perhaps long ago, lost in a world that I could not see or understand. Lastly, my gaze fell upon a young woman whose style was an unabashed tribute to the 1970s punk scene. Her outfit was a riot of leather and chains, each piece a defiant statement against conformity. Her hair was a technicolor dream, strands of bold hues woven into a wild, untamed mane. She exuded an energy that was fierce and unapologetic, yet there was a detachment in her eyes, a disconnect from the here and now. My curiosity was sufficiently piqued, prompting me to approach one of them. The woman whose attire suggested she had walked straight out of the 1920s. "Nice costume," I remarked, trying to sound casual. "Where did you find such an authentic outfit?" She looked at me, her eyes meeting mine for a fleeting moment. But there was no recognition, no flicker of response. She simply turned her head away, dismissing my question and seemingly my very existence. Even by New York City standards, where the unusual is often met with indifference, this felt like a new level of rudeness. I continued walking, my eyes drawn to the surreal dance of neon lights in Times Square. They painted the night in vibrant strokes of reds, blues, and greens, each pulsating glow casting long, eerie shadows on the pavement. The air felt charged with a strange energy, as if the light itself was alive. One billboard caught my eye with its bold promise. "Lunar Estates, own a piece of the moon." It depicted a serene lunar landscape dotted with futuristic homes, families smiling under a starry sky. Next to it, another sign flickered to life, showcasing the astounding chrononauts in an old-timey font. Sepia-toned images flashed of men in bulky diving helmets and Victorian garb, posed dramatically as if ready to leap into some fantastical adventure. A third billboard caught my attention as it flickered erratically, the images on its screen shifting rapidly. It depicted scenes from a conflict that seemed oddly out of time. Soldiers dressed in what looked like Second World War-era uniforms, yet the insignia and flags were unrecognizable. The banner across the top called for enrollment to serve in the Eurasenia War. Eurasenia? I couldn't recall any history lessons featuring such a place. Must be some historical drama or an alternate reality show, I thought, puzzled, as the scenes of soldiers marching in old-style tanks rolling through unknown streets played out before me, all too real and yet impossibly foreign.